This is episode 5 of Radio Artis, a podcast by Studium Generale Artis. Welcome to episode 5 of Radio Artis, which actually is the first episode in a 6-part miniseries we'll be presenting in the coming week. The series is all about equality in the arts, and it's based on an event Studium Generale facilitated in January of this year. And here to introduce the series with me is Catalina from Studium Generale. Welcome, Catalina. It's the first time I have dragged you in front of a microphone, and it's your own microphone because we're both recording at home.
Yes.
You work for Studium Generale. What listeners might not know is that some of the podcasts in this series have been distilled out of programs you designed, you programmed. But it's the first time you're actually here, so could you introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. My name is Catalina de Monk, and I'm part of the team of Artis Studium Generale. I'm a curator, program maker. Actually, we do a lot of programs in the last couple of years on emancipation and feminism. So, that's one of the topics that I'm working on.
And that's actually, we have a small mini-series ahead, a 6-part mini-series actually. And this series is how would you say that? Is a reworking of a symposium you, amongst others, organized. Can you tell me a bit more about the symposium?
Yes, sure. Actually, it's a conference that we called a roadmap to equality in the arts in the Netherlands. And it took place in January, on the 18th of January, to be precise. And it addressed the underrepresentation and misrepresentation of women artists, women of color, non-binary, genderqueer artists. And we wanted to speak about the fact that data, as well as an intersectional approach in current research, are strikingly missing. And the time has come to change this. We wanted to raise questions on how we could start to act, because there's a lot of talking and a lot of discussing, which, to us, in some way acknowledges the status quo over and over again. So with the conference, we wanted to raise awareness and hopefully stimulate or even initiate the gathering of data by inviting and mobilizing existing networks and, using the collective knowledge that is there. So, in essence, putting down a stepping stone on the path to gender equality in the arts in the Netherlands.
Can you tell me a little bit about how this conference came into being?
Oh, yes. This conference was the first public event that we organized. And we, by we, I mean a work group that we founded in 2019, last year. We're an informal coalition, so we're not some kind of an institute or other organization. And we all have the conviction that there is a pressing need for an ongoing project to advocate for equality, for solidarity and diversity at all levels in the Dutch art world. As I said, we want to raise awareness, we want to stimulate action, maybe create an observatory for data monitoring, a lot of other things like commissioning surveys, publish articles. We have all kinds of ideas about developing tools, educational projects, even organizing spokesmanship for this. And of course, we cannot do that alone. So first of all, we hope to mobilize all institutes and individuals that are working on these topics, and in the end, try to establish a gender equality roadmap, which can function as a kind of a political tool, maybe. We believe that together we can be a catalyst of change.
Yeah. So you talk about this the work group. Who's actually involved in that?
Well, in the first place, I should mention Delphine Bedel. She's a researcher, an educator, owner of publishing house Metabooks, someone who's already working for years on these topics, doing really a lot of good work. Actually, it all started with her giving a lecture at the Artist Institute for the Arts. Another person that is involved is Els Cornelis. She's a researcher and an artist, and she lectures at HKU. Well, me and myself, of course, and for advice, we consulted several other artists, educators, researchers, designers, curators, critics, and activists, of course. And well, actually, we hope that our group will grow and other initiatives and individuals will join our battle.
Yeah, judging by the enthusiasm the conference was met with, I think you will have more troops coming soon.
I hope so.
And we also had a troop leader for the day. We had Nancy Jouwe as host, but she was also the keynote speaker. Why Nancy?
Yeah, well, we were very happy that she joined us that day. She's a teacher, she's a researcher and a writer, and she has already for a long time a strong focus on intersectionality, colonial history, art, heritage, and intercultural dialogue. And she speaks and moderates regularly at events that deal with this subject matter. And people may know her as the manager and a cultural producer for institutes like Framer Framed, Cosmopolis, and Mama Cash. And we were really happy to have her involved. As a moderator, she was able to create a very special atmosphere in which all present felt safe and encouraged to speak up. And we really thank Nancy for that. As our keynote speaker, she kicked off the conference by making a real strong case for intersectional thinking and acting in the arts, and she articulated a lot of hindrances, but also accelerators for this in the Dutch art world.
All right, maybe we should have a listen.
So part 1, intersectionality. Difficult word. It's an academic term these days, and sometimes people say it's too academic. But really, it was very much a term from the grassroots before it became an academic term. Especially women of color who were pushing for women's rights already were busy doing intersectionality, you could say. And intersectional feminists usually refer to Sojourner Truth as the ultimate foremother of intersectional thinking and doing. She was born and raised in Dutch New York. She spoke Dutch until she was 9. Why? Because her owner was Dutch. She was an enslaved girl. And then was bought and sold to another owner where she then had to speak English. Was beaten severely because she didn't speak proper English because she was versed in Dutch. But then as a grown-up and as a free woman started to become a public speaker, both speaking on women's rights and the issue of race, obviously stemming from all her personal experiences. And the speech that she held in Akron, Ohio in 1851 is now known as the speech Ain't I a Woman, where she gives all these little examples of how she is being treated or being seen in a position that she's not considered a woman or not a respectable woman, but she still is.
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman?
So to reiterate this notion of her being in this crossroads of positions is what has been so inspiring for intersectional feminists. It was coined academically by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. She was, by the way, she was here in the Netherlands. She's a law professor, and so it was as an academic discipline, it was first sort of used also in law, but then after that also in gender studies and sociology. What it really is it's a tool. Intersectionality you can see as a tool to understand the crossroads of categories of difference, and where gender, race, ethnicity, class, and sexuality and other axes of difference then co-construct, meet each other and co-construct and work simultaneously. So it's different from diversity, where things are topped above one another. Intersectionality is really about, well, when you intersect with all those different categories of difference, you then sort of inhabit a specific position, which is, by the way, not a static position, which then can also have you be in a specific situation of discrimination or privilege because of it, right? And that's important to note. So two things, not just an academic term and different from diversity. It's been a tool, so a concept, a theoretical concept, if you will, a tool that works as an analysis for emancipation and against oppression, looking both at positive and negative processes. And so obviously Kimberly Crenshaw, as a law professor, looked at lots of cases of discrimination. Now, how does this work in practice? I'll give you 3 examples. Example 1, exhibit 1, you could say, right? An example from a law perspective. Meet S03E05. She's a young Dutch-Turkish woman who got hit by a motorist, thus being severely disabled. So it was a traffic accident. She was a teenager at the time, and so basically, yeah, she is not able to function autonomously anymore. What was interesting in the court case that then came is that the Dutch judge awarded her only with almost 13% of what would be considered a normal amount for insurance money to be given to her. So 70,000 euros rather than 550,000 euros. And during the court case, the judge basically said, why was this ruling, you may ask? Well, the judge figured that since she was now not useful anymore for the workforce, and probably having had children already in her 20s, you know, the amount that in a way she wasn't worthy enough to have this full amount, you could say. Now, if Esra had been Muhammad, so if he had been a Turkish male disabled person, the ruling would have been different because of him not being, you know, the one who's getting the babies. But also if it was Anita Janssen rather than S03E05, again, the ruling would have been different because white Dutch women are seen as people who get babies quite late in the game. So the fact that she was both a woman, young and Turkish, so her intersectional position specifically gave this ruling, which was weird because if you look in the same period of time, the Central Bureau for Statistics actually came out with a report saying that it's actually migrant women who work more often full-time in the Netherlands than, say, autochthonous white women. So the actual facts and the statistics, and we'll hear more about statistics and why statistics are so important, said something else than how the judge was ruling. So the judge was also being informed by what you could say stereotypical notions. Exhibit number 2. An example from the arts. The PC Hoofdprijs is the most important literary prize. It was awarded 3 years ago to Astrid Roemer, 4 years ago, who is considered the most famous Dutch Surinamese writer. I think it was the first time that a woman of color was awarded this prize. And although the newspapers, especially the leading newspapers, weren't that negative, they were actually quite positive. One of the most sought-after radio shows on Radio 1 in the Netherlands, so public service, discussed her winning this award as something that was really weird. So literary critic number 1 said, well, this is literally them talking about, they're having this conversation on the radio. Well, it's politics. They want to give attention to Suriname, the Caribbean, literature across borders. They have made a political decision because who actually lives there and can write? Literary critic number 2. It feels like an ideological choice, politically correct thinking. You're like, no, but they actually had this conversation. It sounds weird in English, more like, oh my God, which is also interesting. I probably don't have to explain to you why this is a problem. Now, example number 3, only last a year ago, 2 columnists, women of color, Clarice Kargaard and Saada Noorhusen, both spoke out against the fact that they were discriminated against heavily because they were basically unapologetic columnists speaking about the issues that they felt strongly about and having no qualms about it, just saying it like it is. And that apparently is a crime to a lot of people because they were heavily attacked. Hundreds of racist attacks online and offline, up to death threats. Many of them. They did different things. They made different choices. So Saada basically thought, well, F that. I'm going to stop doing that column. And I'm going to be chief editor of One World. I'm fine. I don't need you guys. Forget it. And Clarice, and both of them went obviously also to the police. And so the newspapers were also trying to figure out, well, what is it about this situation? Where they also asked me to sort of weigh in on that conversation. But the thing is also that Saada said, well, why am I stopping? Not just because it's the racist attacks, that's one thing, but my peers, my colleagues are not having my back. So they love for me to do this edgy stuff, to write these columns, because then, people have clicks on social media, people will read the newspaper online more and more, but they weren't, having her back, so not defending her because she was doing this, and that's not on. So loyalty towards one another and creating a safe space for people who are more vulnerable in that respect is then very important. And that's a hindrance, of course, if your colleagues don't have your back. Let's talk some more about the second part of my talk, hindrances. We used to have a minister of emancipation. Yeah, no, really. 17 years ago, he closed the door. Well, it was a white heterosexual male, as you do in the Netherlands, right? If you talk about emancipation from a Christian political party, CDA. Minister de Geus was his name. And he, in his talk, literally said, we're basically done, people. We're happy. Let's close the door. This was the mood at the time, right? Also, what it meant was basically no money anymore for initiatives around, types of emancipation. And it really impacted society at large, you could say. At that time, so this is the first decade of this millennium, basically if I talk to young people in their 20s and, would use the F word, feminism, for instance, they would look at me like, ooh, they were very annoyed by it. So feminism was totally out, you could say. That was sort of the dominant discourse in society. And it even went through to, at that time, I was working at Mama Cash. And so there were a lot of young women of color and older women of color who were doing amazing stuff, really cool things. Even Mama Cash staff and board was sort of trapped in what I would consider two myths: that the Netherlands had successfully fulfilled its emancipation purpose, one, and secondly, that art is a luxury. So, let's not do that anymore. And so, unfortunately, that program then was sort of shut down, and I was really a minority within that constellation. So, second hindrance, the quality versus diversity argument. This is something we hear a lot, right? I saw this tweet only the other day. I picked it off of Twitter 2 days ago. It's Stephen King. We all know Stephen King, right? He's this enormously successful writer, Carrie, Thrill. All his books have been filmed almost, basically. So he has an enormous voice. And this is what he says: I would never consider diversity in matters of art, only quality. It seems to me that to do otherwise would be wrong. Well, we have a problem there, I think. And while the counting, the data analysis and the counting that was done, and we'll hear about that later on, and that came into the news, again, a journalist asking, so why is counting so important? And it's here in my quote, basically it's in Dutch. I say, well, quality. If you look at quality, and people say, well, we'll only look at quality. Quality is a cop-out, is to not consider the enormous disbalance, the underrepresentation that goes on. Why is there then such a disbalance, right? As if black women or men or women in general cannot deliver quality. Because if we really would talk about, consider quality, what do we mean by it, first of all? What are the indicators to think about this is quality, right? So really, quality is a cop-out to not engage with notions of diversity or intersectionality. Now, another thing, and this is something that obviously has been a thing the last sort of 5 years in the Netherlands, we have started talking about race. And I give lectures about that. I have a class, a whole a lecture series on race in the Netherlands, but I do some public speaking on it as well. And what I usually start with is saying, well, let's start with being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because this is a difficult, sensitive, fragile topic. People get annoyed, upset, or feel attacked or feel guilty. There's a lot of emotion around it. But why is it that we find race such a difficult thing? Well, there's a lot of stuff, and I cannot tackle everything. But one thing I would like to remind us collectively is that because of World War II, especially here in the Netherlands, because of World War II, we basically decided not to do race anymore. It had become taboo. Obviously, because we realized that our neighbors, because of race, had killed off millions of people. And we're like, well, let's not do that again. So both in sort of academia, but also in sort of public discourse, it became a taboo. Didn't mean, though, that it vanished. But we started using ethnicity much more as an idea of difference. We also saw tolerance as very much a Dutch quality. It has, of course, historical roots. Religious tolerance was something that especially Amsterdam prided itself for, because yes, Jewish people from Southern Europe or the Huguenots from France all went to the Republic of the Netherlands in the early modern ages, where they weren't persecuted. This is sort of a common idea that we collectively have, and we feel comfortable with that position. And if you don't do race, and people start saying to you, but you're racist because, then we're having a very difficult conversation. One of those conversations and how that sort of works out for me personally was here in the Museum of Arnhem. I was invited to do sort of an opening speech for S03E05. She's a visual artist. Check her out. She's a prize award-winning visual artist, and I think she's the first woman of color that actually got her own show in the Netherlands. This is 6 years ago, and I was asked to talk about notions, well, basically to introduce her work and sort of contextualize it a little bit. So obviously I used the R word, I talked about race, and then this woman comes up to me after and says, "Oh, but how is it that you speak Dutch so well? It's amazing." And obviously that's considered a compliment, but it's not, I can tell you. It's actually, well, I'm like saying like, well, I've born and raised here. I went to Dutch schools. I actually have a university degree. So one would think that, I can speak Dutch. But then this woman was better informed because she knows I'm partly Papuan. And so she was kind of confused that me being a Papuan also could speak, perfectly Dutch. It just didn't click in her head. And so both of us had to do different work after that. Me being obviously very annoyed by it, but also realizing the world, the bubble that she was living in. But these are typical things that still happen. How am I doing for time? Still well. Okay, not too bad. And this also reminds us that even if, a museum as a contact zone, a place where people can come together, enjoy art, and have a conversation about it, can also still be violent places. And so we have to be aware of that fact that also, even if there's a great curator, they are doing wonderful work, but if the infrastructure of that place doesn't adhere to those principles, values of being a racist-free, sexist-free space for everyone, then it becomes difficult. The other thing which was funny about this whole thing 6 years ago here at Museum Arnhem was that S03 and I didn't know each other, but we saw each other and started hysterically laughing. It was almost performative. It was like, oh my God, ah. Why? Because we realized we were the only two people of color in the room. It was this classic white space, this classic white situation where us who had to do the performance, had to, educate the people sort of on different levels. And so it was this little moment of realizing what it is we were doing there. So another thing that's, I guess, a hindrance is this notion of the canon. Especially in the arts, we are so deeply sort of, it's so important somehow. The canon, which is also an autonomous thing, so don't touch it. And then within that canon, it's the genius that nestles there. The genius is so important. But that genius is always a white guy, right? And sometimes, okay, maybe a guy of color, but for a woman, it's very difficult, or a non-binary person for that matter, it's very difficult to inhabit the position of the genius. I'm coming to my third part, which is accelerators. One accelerating aspect is, I think, yes, let's talk some more about that canon. This is, so I convened a series of talks, a series of gatherings under the heading Black Netherlands in 2015, 16, and 17. Mostly in Leiden and Amsterdam, where we had a discussion in the arts also about portraiture, and many, many different things came by. One talk was also about the role of black feminism here, a talk with 3 feminists. And it was Cristel Munguende, the youngest panelist, who also said, well, it's really, really, really important to have your work also be accessible. Your canon, a lot of this canon is very invisible. And a lot of that work has been hugely important. How can we make that more accessible? I think that's something that we should really work on. Secondly, I want to briefly touch upon the work of Iris. Who doesn't know Iris Kensmil? See, there's still some people. Well, you should know her because she's awesome. First of all, she's a visual artist and a painter who actually was invited to be the Dutch representative for the Venice Biennial. And you know the Venice Biennial, right? It's the sort of the oldest and the most important sort of visual arts global gathering that takes place every other year in Venice, if it's not being flooded, by the way. And we have a Dutch pavilion there, and that's where her work was on show, together with Remy Jungerman, by the way. And her work is also really, really interesting because I think what she does is portraying all these worlds, people that inhabit these worlds, a black diasporic transnational world where thinkers, artists, activists of color have been working and doing, and basically she is giving them space in her paintings, really beautifully done. And I think it's much more revolutionary than we give her credit for sometimes. So look out for her, and also let's think more deeply about what it is she's been doing. She's the typical person who's not very, let's say, she's not doing, a lot of her own PR. She's not pushing herself the whole time on Instagram or being in the newspaper the whole time. She lets her thoughts come out through her art. And that's sometimes, she's a very modest person, I would say. That's also why we don't maybe see a lot of her and hear a lot of her, but you should. Okay, another accelerator, data. The importance of empirical data. We don't have them, weirdly enough. And it's been said already, we will hear more about it later on, so I'm not going to say too much. But I think it's a huge accelerator, a huge way of pushing the conversation, because we basically don't know. We don't, and we need proof, right? We really need proof to talk about what's the actual situation that is going on here. Who doesn't know the Black Archives? Okay, well, okay, great. So they're doing really good work. 90% of you actually does know the importance of actual spaces where the narrative is changed, is pushed, but also where the canon is being transformed through literal books, but also talks and the accessibility to those books. They're not archivists. They don't know, the first thing like practically how to archive, but they're learning by doing. But the more important thing is also that they, because of that collection of books that they now have, they've started a conversation. A lot of teachers actually come with their students weekly to visit the space and the place and the importance and the whole context around it. Sometimes we have gained more ground, and that ground has been taken away from us again. In a way. So I think that's such a key thing to take on board when we analyze these situations. It's not a linear process. It's not like it was all bad in the past and now we're going to a better future. No, some stuff was better organized, earlier in the day, and we forgot about it or we threw it away. Much like architects sometimes throw away really beautiful stuff, like the inner city of Utrecht that has been fucked up by architects, and now they're refurbishing that. And right, I mean, it's a good metaphor for the situation. Okay, thank you so much.
That's it for the first episode in this mini-series. If you're listening this on the day it came out, our next episode drops tomorrow. If you're listening somewhere in the future, it's already there for you. Episode 2 is all about the importance of data on representation and why data is important. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.